Welcome to this deep dive. You've sent us some really fascinating stuff about spirituality and the brain. Excerpts from The Spiritual Brain, some neuroscientific studies, and even some articles on evolutionary psychology. So it's pretty clear that you're really curious about how all of these seemingly different ideas connect. And believe me, things are about to get pretty mind-bending.
Yeah, what I find so intriguing about the materials you sent is the wide range of perspectives they offer. I mean, you've got the spiritual brain arguing for the soul from like a neuroscientific perspective. Then we've got actual hard data from brain imaging studies. And then we've got evolutionary psychology, which is trying to understand like the origins of religious belief.
Yeah, so we're not just like dipping our toes in the water here. We're going for a full-blown deep dive. So let's just jump right in with The Spiritual Brain. This book really doesn't hold back. I mean, it just comes right out and says that materialism, the idea that everything can be explained by physical processes, just can't fully account for these spiritual experiences that people have.
And that's a really key point, right? The book is directly challenging this dominant scientific worldview. And, it's a challenge that often sparks some pretty strong reactions. The book even mentions how the atheist neuroscientist Sam Harris, he got a ton of criticism just for suggesting that maybe there was a possibility of non-materialist phenomena.
Yeah, it's interesting how even just like bringing up the idea can be so controversial. And the spiritual brain doesn't shy away from it at all. It takes on Richard Dawkins' famous blind watchmaker analogy head on, the one that attributes all the complexity of life to these purely mechanistic evolutionary processes.
Basically, the authors are saying, hold on, there might be more to the story than that. They're suggesting that consciousness and spirituality might not just be side effects of brain activity, but could actually point to something beyond the material world.
Okay, so here's where things start to get really interesting for me. The book uses altruism, like those selfless acts of kindness, as an example of something that's really hard to explain if you only believe in purely materialistic explanations. The idea that we're all just driven by self-interest and survival of the fittest just doesn't seem to hold up all the time, does it?
Yeah, and the book really drives this point home with some powerful real-life stories. It talks about this guy, Trent Fenwick, who donated a kidney to a complete stranger. It's hard to explain that level of selfless generosity through the lens of, evolutionary advantage alone.
Exactly. It kind of makes you wonder if there's something deeper going on, right? Some kind of motivation beyond just benefiting yourself or your genes.
And this brings up another really interesting point. How much can we actually rely on animal behavior, especially, the behavior of apes, to really understand human spirituality?
Right. Just because we share a lot of our DNA with chimps doesn't automatically mean that we have the same kind of mental and spiritual capacities.
Exactly. And there's research that supports that, too. There are those studies showing that dogs are actually better than chimps at understanding human social cues.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah. And the book also mentions this guy, Jonathan Marks, who really critiques ape language studies. And he argues that after decades of research, there's still no convincing evidence that apes have the kind of complex mental abilities that we see in humans.
So that kind of suggests that human spirituality might not just be like a more evolved version of something that's already present in our primate ancestors. It could be something that's uniquely human, something that really sets us apart. Speaking of things that are uniquely human, let's talk about Michael Persinger's God helmet experiments. Now, this was a story that really captured the public imagination. This helmet was actually designed to stimulate the temporal lobes, and Persinger believed that it could induce religious experiences. It even made headlines when Richard Dawkins, the famous skeptic, tried it out.
Yeah, the whole media frenzy around the God helmet really highlights how scientific ideas, especially those dealing with consciousness and spirituality, can so easily be oversimplified and sensationalized.
It really became this big, almost mythical thing, a way to artificially create spiritual experiences. But there were some issues with Persinger's experiments, weren't there? Didn't some Swedish researchers try to replicate his findings and fail?
That's right. And it really emphasizes how important skepticism and rigorous research are, especially when we're dealing with such subjective experiences like religious experiences. Double-blind studies are absolutely essential in these cases.
Yeah, we need to make sure we're not just seeing what we want to see or letting our biases influence the results. And this kind of leads us to another really fascinating aspect of this whole discussion, the power of the mind to actually influence the brain and the body. I mean, we see this with the placebo effect all the time, where people experience real physical changes simply because they believe they're receiving a treatment. even if it's just a sugar pill.
Yeah, the placebo effect is a truly remarkable demonstration of how much power the mind has over our physical well-being. And it's not just limited to pain relief either. There are studies showing its impact on a whole range of different conditions.
Like that story about the surgeon who used his thoughts to reduce his own stress levels during surgery.
Absolutely. And then there was that study where patients who believed they were getting a stem cell treatment for their knees reported significant improvement, even though it was a sham surgery.
Wow, that's incredible. If our beliefs and thoughts can have that kind of an effect on our well-being, it really makes you question the nature of the mind, doesn't it? Is it really just a product of the brain, or is there something more going on?
Which brings us to what might be the most profound challenge to the materialist view of consciousness: near-death experiences, or NDEs.
NDEs are often dismissed as hallucinations or the result of oxygen deprivation to the brain. But some cases are just incredibly difficult to explain away with those simple explanations. The case of Pam Reynolds is a perfect example. She had a very vivid NDE while she was undergoing a procedure where her brain activity was basically stopped. She was clinically dead. And yet, she was able to accurately report observing events that took place in the operating room while she was in that state.
That level of detail when her brain was supposedly not functioning really challenges the idea that consciousness is simply a product of brain activity. And Pam's case isn't unique. Dr. Pim van Lommel conducted a large-scale study on NDEs, and his findings were equally compelling.
He found that many NDEs reported long-lasting positive changes in their lives after their experiences, like increased empathy and a decreased fear of death. Those have long-term effects, not just some fleeting illusions. It suggests that NDEs might be more than just neurological quirks. They can have a really profound and lasting impact on people's lives, and also their understanding of reality. And this leads us to another area of research that's often met with skepticism: the evidence for psi phenomena, things like telepathy and psychokinesis.
Yeah, psi research often faces an uphill battle because it really challenges the prevailing scientific paradigm. But the book mentions some pretty intriguing studies, like those using random number generators, or RNGs, which seem to show statistically significant results, suggesting that maybe our minds can actually influence events from a distance.
It's like science is saying, well, if we can't explain it, then it can't be real. But maybe, just maybe, we need to expand our understanding of what's possible.
Exactly. And that brings us to the Carmelite studies, which offer some fascinating insights into the neuroscience of mystical experiences.
So in those studies, researchers were looking to understand what was happening in the brain during those really profound states of mystical union. And they turned to Carmelite nuns, who have a long tradition of contemplative practice. They used brain imaging techniques like fMRI and QEEG to observe the nuns' brains while they were experiencing these mystical states. So what did they find? Was there like a God spot in the brain?
Well, not exactly a God spot. What they actually found was that multiple brain regions are involved in these mystical experiences, not just the temporal lobes, like some people had thought. It's like a complex symphony of brain activity going on, with all these different areas working together to create this experience.
Oh, so it's not like flipping a switch in one spot. It's more like a whole orchestra playing together.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is that the nuns' descriptions of their experiences are very similar to what a lot of people report during these profound spiritual experiences. Regardless of their background or their beliefs, it seems like this sense of oneness, this feeling of interconnectedness, is a common thread.
It really makes you wonder, is the brain actually creating these experiences? Or is it more like it's acting as a receiver, like a window into a reality that already exists?
Right. We tend to define reality based on what we can measure and observe, but what if our instruments, and even our own senses, just aren't sophisticated enough to capture the whole picture? What if there are dimensions of reality that we're simply not equipped to detect?
Yeah, like if we can only perceive a limited spectrum of light, is it really that crazy to think that there might be other dimensions of reality that are beyond our current ability to perceive? I mean, all of the evidence that we've been exploring in this deep dive seems to suggest that there's a lot more to consciousness than we currently understand.
Yeah.
Maybe a lot more to reality itself.
You've given us some seriously thought-provoking material for this deep dive. It seems like even the most hardcore skeptics in the scientific community are starting to acknowledge that there are certain aspects of consciousness and spiritual experience that just can't be easily explained. It seems like the materialist model, while definitely useful, it may not be the whole story.
So where do we go from here? It seems like science needs to come up with new models, new ways of thinking about all of this that can accommodate these seemingly inexplicable phenomena.
Well, I think maybe the biggest takeaway from all of this is that this exploration of consciousness and spirituality, it's really just getting started. It's like a whole new frontier that's ripe for discovery, and it has the potential to completely change how we understand what it means to be human.
It's like we've been looking at the world through this tiny little peephole, and we're finally starting to realize that there might be this whole vast, incredible landscape out there that we've been missing.
Exactly. And who knows what we might find as we keep exploring? What amazing insights are waiting to be uncovered?
Well, we've definitely covered a lot of ground today in this deep dive into how spirituality and the brain are connected. We've explored some really fascinating ideas, some mind-boggling concepts.
Yeah, we have. From that challenge to materialism that we talked about, to the mysteries of near-death experiences, and even the evidence for things like telepathy and psychokinesis. There's clearly still so much to learn about the human mind and its incredible potential.
Hopefully this deep dive has given you a whole new perspective on these topics, and maybe even spark some new questions for you to ponder.
Yeah, and remember, this is just the beginning. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and see where your own curiosity leads you. You never know what incredible discoveries you might make along the way.
That's it for this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep that sense of wonder alive.